Now, it's time for the Anchormen podcast with Matt Gaetz and Dan Ball.
Welcome back to the Anchorman program. I'm Matt Gaetz, host of the Matt Gaetz Show here on One American News every night, 9 Eastern, 6 Pacific, and I am joined by absolutely the smartest group of people I have ever had on Anchorman. As always, my colleague on the Matt Gaetz Show, the original producer of Steve Bannon's War Room, worked on Capitol Hill in my office, in Congressman Santos' office. Vish Burra, thank you for being back with us.
Always a pleasure.
And Kara McKinney, Kara, one of our hosts here at One American News. And whenever I want to know how the really brilliant people are thinking about something in the news, I ask Kara's viewpoint. Thank you for joining us on the program again.
You're too kind, but thank you.
Yeah, and we've got joining us through the Zoom machine, Allum Bokhari, the managing director of the Foundation for Freedom Online. I have been a follower of Allum's. I believe I probably hold the record for the most work of Allum's submitted by a congressman to the congressional record, whether it is the work that he's done on censorship, on the different excesses of power in the bureaucratic state. I really became a fan early in my congressional career of your writing and thinking and work, and it's incredible to have you with us. So here's what we're going to do. I've asked all of you to think about one big question in the news, in culture, in politics, and policy right now that you want to discuss among the group. And we are, of course, as gentlemen, going to go ladies first. And Kara, what is it out there that you're looking at or thinking about that could really reshape the way that we're living here in the country?
Well, there's a lot of issues, right, going on in politics. Immigration is a big one. Social security, we've heard that come up. So many issues, but they all kind of seem to hover around a central theme that is not talked about as much, and that's the birth rate crisis. That's something President Trump is tapping the Heritage Foundation and some others to start thinking about ways to improve U.S. fertility. So I know one idea that's under current discussion is the possibility, I know President Trump was asked about it, and he said, well, sounds good. Don't know if it'll come to fruition, but at least a starting point right now for this discussion is giving new mothers $5,000 per child. So I guess that's the launching off part is, should we pay women to have children? Is that a good idea, a bad idea? Will that help to improve the birth rates? Because, one of the reasons why we had this immigration crisis from the neoliberals and the neoconservatives, Senator Chuck Schumer said, I think a year or two ago, he made some flippant comment about, well, you guys aren't having kids, so we got to bring people over to work and pay taxes and the rest. And we see the fallout from the immigration debate, both legal and illegal immigration. And again, it hovers around the central theme of birth rates. I think around the year 2023 is when the U.S. kind of cratered into sub-replacement level births. It was about 2.5 kids is what the average was for women. Now it's, I believe, 1.63, somewhere around there. So below the 2.1 needed to replace just the current population. So for my part on the 5,000, I see it as, okay, so I disagree with the policy, but I agree with the idea behind it, right? One thing I appreciate is that President Trump wants to have the government and the wider public finally thank women and thank them for having babies. That's something that we've seen really dismissed and caricatured for so long. So I appreciate that. I just don't think it's going to get to the root of the issue. And one of the roots of the issue for the birth rate crisis is that people just aren't getting married or aren't getting married soon enough. That is part of the reason why we're not having as many babies. And so then there's a lot more questions that come into that. But I think it's not going to address that, so I don't think it'll work. But I appreciate the support, Mr. President.
Well, I've always seen, because I agree, look, the birth rate decline is a big issue. And I'm glad that President Trump has picked up this issue. And I like the spirit, essentially, behind the proposal. But I don't like the idea without really serious stipulations, right? I've always seen the government as like a terrible polygamist, right? That the government has essentially decided that it's going to marry every single woman in America and then provide them benefits based on terrible incentives, right? And so if you have a child but you're below the poverty line, you may get $500 a month from the government. But if you have one child and you're below the poverty line and you have no man at home or no husband at home, you get $800. Therefore, the way to get more money out of the government is to make sure to have a kid without a husband. That is the incentive. And so I don't like the way that incentive structure is currently set up. I think that it creates bad outcomes. And I think that that's ultimately what needs to be tamped down. And if we're going to do this $5K per baby to mothers, it should be stipulated to, it's a child with somebody you're married to and are currently married to. And I think that is a good stipulation to have on such a policy. I think that if you even want to talk about directionally getting the government away from doing this kind of payout structure based on bad incentives, I'm more in favor of a flat rate, where you basically say, if you're below the poverty line, here's $1,000 a month. Good luck, right? I don't care if you have one kid. I don't care if you have 10 kids. I don't care if it's out of wedlock or you're currently married. This is the flat fee or the flat amount that we give for people in need, and that's that. Muammar Gaddafi, he might be not the best example, but for his people, he did incentivize a lot of these things, these family formation things, business formation, getting a home, and would incentivize it.
And then they dragged him in the streets and killed him.
I was going to say.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, they look. I'm not going to say that everyone was happy with him.
He also kept a lot of migrants out of Europe.
Fair.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think that he did incentivize a lot of the right things for his people. And I think Donald Trump is taking some of that spirit.
Allum, you in on the 5K child tax credit bump?
Well, I'm going to be boring and agree with the rest of the panel and say, yes, the spirit of it is good. It's good that the administration is trying to address this problem because, trying to fix low birth rates and the impact that has on the economy by just importing more people from foreign shores obviously hasn't worked. It's led to the kind of moment of political turmoil we're currently in, and, trying to correct the mistakes of the past 10 years with mass immigration. But as Vish said, the problem is incentives. You give $5,000 to people who are having kids. What are the other conditions? Are they going to be married? Do they have their own independent income? You have to think about,
Wait, hold on, Allum. Would you titrate it based on that? Like, you get $2,000 for an out of wedlock kid. If you get the ring, maybe like an extra $3K. And if you get all the way to the altar, like $10K, would you tier it?
Well, I think it should be tiered in some regards, absolutely, because out of wedlock kids are not lead to all sorts of social problems. The other thing I'd say is what sort of income does the family already have that they're getting? So the sort of person for whom $5,000 is a lot of money, are they going to be able to provide an environment for raising a child that's actually good and stable and decent? That's another thing to consider. I mean, the question is, is $5,000 actually not enough? I mean, you want to incentivize people who might think that $5,000 is not that much money. So how do you incentivize people like that? Because they probably those sorts of people probably have independent incomes. They're the sort of people you want to have kids because they're able to provide a good environment for the child they're raising.
This is so pathetic that we have to sit around wondering how the government has to appropriately incentivize people to have children. Because, wasn't Mother Nature supposed to do that? Weren't we told to go forth and multiply? We have to sit here and figure out what lever the government has to toggle to get us in this business. Who is the person? Model the person for me for whom this $5,000 is the dispositive factor. They're sitting around and saying, you know what, honey, I'm really deciding if we're going to have the kid or not. Tell you what, the extra $5K is what gets us there. there. Time to make the magic happen.
Well, unfortunately, you will then to start incentivizing, as you were saying earlier, and I've seen some of these videos. There's these videos on X going around, and it's this woman saying when that EBT money hits, right? And it's the mom with the kids from all the different dads, and she's not too good at raising them, watching them, inculcating them with wisdom, virtue, values, anything like that. That's who you would be incentivizing. So if the left's issue is that they think power underlies everything, every relationship, every interaction between people, an issue for the right is they think money underlies, as if you just give money and then people say, okay, I guess I'll have a kid now.
Do you think that those people exist? Do you think that people exist out there in mass that like the 5K is the key decision maker? Because I'll just tell you this, Vish would love to have children, but the issue is not $5,000. It's that he hasn't found the right person to have them with.
I was going to, exactly. So like I was talking about, so the marriage, I'm sorry.
It's okay, please.
It's true though, it's true.
It's totally true.
By the way, you'd pay the $5,000.
Look, I would pay the $5,000 maybe, but I think to another point, it's not just the $5,000. It's the family formation is more about like economics. You know, if I can't get two people together whose combined income can make a down payment and the monthly payment on a home, right? I don't even have a home to raise my family in, and if I'm working 12 hours a day and my wife is working 12 hours a day, who's going to do the chores around the house, right? And like there's not there and
the
minimum
illegal
wage
immigrants
laws
that Chuck Schumer is going to bring back from El Salvador.
Yeah,
They are
right.
going to be the ones that are going to do it for you.
So another huge issue, right, is why people aren't matching up. A lot of people now come from divorced or broken homes, so they know that pain very intimately. They don't want to repeat it, so they're afraid. There's a failure to launch for
Totally.
a lot of young people. A lot of young people, it's a weird duality. You were cocooned in your bubble in the daycare system, the public school system, and in your parents' house where the entire idea is safetyism. Don't get hurt. Don't try and, go out into the world, just stay here, eyes on the screen, eyes where I can see you, and stay safe. And then all of a sudden at 18 years old, this school system and daycare and everything that's kind of carried you in this cocoon bubble now spits you onto the world and say, bootstraps, make your life. When the game is in many ways rigged against you economically, and a lot of people, they don't know what to do with that. They don't have a religious or tradition to fall back on. They don't have wisdom. A lot of times their parents are the ones who screwed up too, so their parents can't give them the wisdom the parents themselves didn't have. And so a lot of people find themselves floundering, going, I don't know what I want to do. And the entire world just says, do you, buddy, whatever makes you happy. And then you're sitting there going, I don't know what makes me happy. So a lot of people have failure to launch. They start doing the drugs. They're drinking too much. They don't put their mind into anything useful. And then you start to see a lot of psychosis and mental illness because of this. And so if you are a young person and you're trying to find your forever person, your marriage, your spouse, someone that you actually want to have a kid with, well, it's really hard. Look at the dating scene right now. That's why the joke is if you're currently married or in a stable relationship, you feel like you got the last helicopter out of Nam, because it's like a battlefield down there. You start talking to someone and you find out they're kind of psychotic. Why would you want to have a kid with them? Those are a lot of the more serious issues that the 5,000 isn't going to fix.
I'm currently
Allum-
behind enemy lines on that one.
Allum, so are Americans stuck in their starter mortgage rates and their starter marriages for the same reason? Because you got a good deal with like a low interest rate and like a decently respectable spouse that you could possibly procreate with, and thus you should just lock in your current deal forever? Is that where America sits?
It's a truly depressing conversation. I think the other thing we have to consider is we've got two generations now that receive little to no mainstream instruction in relationships or marriage. That sort of instruction used to come from religions. The closest thing modern society has to an official ideology of relationships and gender roles and gender relations is feminism, which obviously is completely crackpot in many cases. So there's been no serious replacement for organized religion in terms of instructing young people and teaching young people about relations and relationships and marriage and things like that.
Everything
So
gets
that needs to be
replaced.
replaced.
Everything gets replaced, right? Because that vacuum has been filled by the algorithm. It's been filled by the TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram algorithm, and that's a very sad thing. And speaking of tech, Allum, you wanted to pose a macro question to us about sort of where the right positions on a lot of our new tech bros. What are you thinking about it?
Yeah, there's been this term that's been tossed around for about half a year now, the so-called tech right, which I find to be, first of all, a little bit of a suspect term. There's a big difference between, say, Elon Musk and the X platform and, Mark Zuckerberg and Meta and Google and Microsoft. Musk, I think, stands on his own. He poured, hundreds of millions of dollars of his own money into the election campaign last year. He bought Twitter and restored free speech for the most part. I mean, if anyone's qualified to hold the label tech right, it would be him, just because of the clear weight of his contributions. But on the other hand, you have people like Mark Zuckerberg and Meta who spent the last month lobbying the Trump administration to drop this FTC case against the company that might break them up. And Zuckerberg has sort of pivoted towards the right. He went on Joe Rogan. He trashed Joe Biden. He donated $1 million to the inauguration committee. But, he said he wants to bring back free speech, but there are still major conservative influencers, pro-Trump influencers who are banned on Meta platforms. And then you have companies like Microsoft and even Amazon who've done little to nothing to show that they're part of a so-called tech right. So I wonder about this term and where the tech right is even going, if there even is a tech right. Because if you compare something like Mark Zuckerberg donating almost $500 million in 2020 to those infamous ballot drop boxes in swing states that were so pivotal in winning the election for Joe Biden. And you compare that to what he's done recently. He said he's pro-free speech. He hasn't made any big his Chan Zuckerberg initiative has not made any big donations to pro-free speech causes. He says he's against European censorship laws. Is he supporting the people who are fighting back against European censorship laws in Europe, mostly the populist right? No sign of that happening. He hasn't even unbanned some of these people. So I wonder where the tech right is going, and if there even is a tech right, and where the tech right and the MAGA right can find alignment. So what do you got? What are your guys' thoughts on that?
Well, I want to go first on that. I think there is a tech right. I think that there is a spectrum to it. Elon Musk is probably the most prominent, who has exhibited the most prominent, let's say, right-wing ideas or ideologies on his Twitter posts and some of his interviews. But I also think that there's the Mark Andreessens of the world. There's the Sam Altmans. Then it goes further left, I think, to Mark Zuckerberg, and then there's, I think, still plenty of holdovers who will never call themselves the tech right, who are denizens of Silicon Valley. But I do think that for the long term, if we want to talk about coalition building, if we want to talk about where is the opportunity to expand our numbers, not just in the talent pool, but in the voter pool, I think that there is an opportunity with the tech right. And a lot of these folks who are pissed off at the sort of quality of life degradation in Silicon Valley and San Francisco. A lot of those people ended up moving to Austin, Texas, and Phoenix, Arizona, etc. I think that there's an opportunity to build with those people. And the reason I say that is because these are people who
but you got to beef with them. Don't give me that.
Hold on. Hold on. I want to start by setting up the positive is that they have a positive vision of wanting to build. But the negative part of that is that they want to build at the cheapest cost possible, because that in turn translates into profits into their pockets. And the way that they're willing to do that and want to do it and are advocating to do it is by unleashing the H-1B visa to its maximum potential. And that, I think, is a terrible, terrible idea. The MAGA right that the tech right wants to kind of ride off of into Donald Trump's ear and a circle of influence, the MAGA right's number one issue since day one has always been immigration, and it's immigration across the spectrum. That's not just low-skilled immigration, but that's high-skilled immigration as well. That is the H-1B visa. The H-1B visa, I have so much experience with this thing.
Okay, yeah, no, I get. You could lead the Indian Americans against H-1B visa coalition, but to the point he's presenting about the future of the coalition. So I think you did a great job framing up where the coalition blossoms and where it fractures. Yeah. So what are the terms of the relationship then?
Well, I think that we need to basically come to détente. On immigration, you guys are out of the conversation, period. The tech right is out of the conversation when it comes to immigration. MAGA gets what it wants on immigration.
So we censor the tech right on.
We don't have to censor them because we could beat them down with our ideas.
All right.
As we've done on
what are
Christmas.
the other terms? And then we're going to hear Kara.
On the other tariff and trade war stuff, that's also going to be a contentious issue. The moment that the electric joule is cheaper in any other country than in America, you will see every data center in America be offshored into that country, because data centers and databases are all about the cost of energy, and that's why they haven't moved to China, because thank God energy is still cheaper in America than it is in China. So that's another part. Now, what we will give to them is the opportunity to continue building, to have beautiful cities that are, law and order, clean, rid them of homelessness. They want their utopias. They are utopians at the end of the day. We will help make that happen, but you're not going to flood them with every third worlder who knows C++ or .NET or JavaScript at 1/10 of the rate that you would have to pay an American. We're not doing that.
Well, because they're not conservative, right? The tech right, as is Silicon Valley. I know they're moving down to Texas. They're going to make Texas blue, right? Democrats been saying that for years. They're well on their way to doing that. They're not conservative in the sense that I'm rooted in time, place, history, and America as a people, right? And those who want to join it and be part of that rooted cultural movement. The tech right will always see that as an issue, because what is tech? It's creative destruction. They need to keep destroying the bonds that tie, and to create new wants and needs and desires in people. That's in fact what marketing is. You didn't know you wanted this product, but I'm going to make you think that you need it now, even though you never knew about it before. It's creating new desires in people. It's creating bonds that used to hold you, because if I and my husband and our baby, if we're able to be a self-sufficient unit, like I said, with our friends, our family, and our community, we'll be quite self-sufficient. We don't need every new gadget and gizmo that will be coming off the conveyor belt that Silicon Valley would like to provide for us. But if we're all isolated, atomized people, well, then that's all we kind of have left to ourselves. We're just consumers, nothing but consumers. I know there's the meme about just consume, but that's why they need you atomized. So,
well, hold on, because there's tension between what you and Vish are saying there. Because what Vish is saying is that the core of the relationship can be built on a unified desire for the utopia that is clean and doesn't have your third grade teacher trying to turn your kid trans. But what you say is that those tech elites just view us all as pieces of the economy, producers and consumers.
Yes.
Not a part of their utopia.
Oh, yeah, no, because they will, no matter what overtures they try and do to MAGA now, they will turn into Obama really fast. The whole you bitter clingers with your Bibles and your guns, because that's how they see us. They see us stodgy, set in our ways backwards, and holding back mankind from all that we could be with transhumanism and all this techno-futurism and all the like. And so I think that is a direct conflict that will always be there. So from my perspective as a paleoconservative, post-liberal, Catholic integralist, so many labels, I guess. Everyone's a label these days. There will always be friction, but I can, work with like Elon Musk. He does a lot of great work at Doge. And so there are places where we can agree, but I don't want them leading the conservative movement. I think that's an issue the right has all the time. You'll have these hardcore, just left-wingers, and they say something banally true, something that's just like true, kind of, I guess. And the next thing you know, the conservative right is like, let's make them the face of our movement. So we need to make sure we don't do that with the tech right, because they're not truly conservative. It's in a lot of their overtures now. It's similar to, I don't know if you're familiar with Scott Horton at the Libertarian Institute. He kind of talked about this with the ATF in Waco in the 90s, how, you had so many Republicans back to back in the presidency, and you finally have Bill Clinton. So they thought, wow, the pendulum's swinging. We're going to have Democrats for a while. The ATF's like, let's, make these Democrats really like us. Let's kill a bunch of fundamentalists on TV. I kind of see that as like the tech right in a sense. Is like, well, we had the left. The left went as hard as they could after stealing it in 2020. The people rejected a lot of the tenets of wokeness. So maybe the right will be in power for a while. And while President Trump has a lot of popular support, let's ride that wave, but in a very cynical, Machiavellian way.
So it is all transactional. Go ahead.
So I'll disagree just slightly with what Kara said there. I think the creative destruction part of tech is, I would say, the best part of the tech industry. I love the way they creatively destroyed the mainstream media they continue to do so. They made podcasting culture possible. They made centralized media organizations like the New York Times and CNN, if not obsolete, but then well on their way to obsolescence. And that was a long time coming. Another example of this, where I sort of disagreed a little bit with some critics of the tech industry, was you had a couple of weeks ago, Jack Dorsey, the former CEO of Twitter. He said something along the lines of delete all IP law. And that caused a massive backlash, which understandably, because delete all IP law is a very extreme statement that I don't fully agree with. However, there's a case to be made, and the reason why Dorsey said that is because the whole tech industry wants to weaken IP law so that they can feed their LLMs all the data in existence, feed their AI models all the data in existence. And there's a lot of potential dystopia there if you actually delete all IP law. But there's definitely a case to be made, and I think you can have some alignment with the tech right here on significantly reforming IP law, because who's the greatest beneficiary of IP law? It's the big Hollywood studios like Disney, right? We talk about tech companies being monopolies, but a company like Disney is a massive monopoly. They just hoard all of this intellectual property and turn it into the most garbage movies you can possibly imagine. It would be great if ordinary people could use large language models and diffusion engines to create their own versions of Hollywood movies at a fraction of the cost. I think that is where the technology is going. It's a major, major threat to Hollywood. It's a major, major threat to big video game studios as well. And that's another area where the creative destruction of tech could actually be a very good thing.
And also, they at least bring something to the movement. I hate to be like overly ableist on this, but they bring political ability. Like Elon Musk helped us design a way to win Pennsylvania with targeting skills that any other contributor simply cannot achieve. And so I have a similar view to Vish. I sort of view our relationship with the tech right like the church. The church has to grow. So our politics has to be able to grow into those who are helping define the future through technology. While at the same time, the newest arrivals in your church don't typically lead the sermon on Sunday. You don't put them in the pulpit to drive the theology and the doctrine and the message. And I think keeping those lines delineated ought to be fine for them. Because where else are they going? Where else are the tech bros going, Allum? Are they gonna go to the genderless, purple-haired woketopians and find common cause anymore? I doubt it.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the future of politics, they really don't have many places to go, because the Democrats are getting more extreme there. AOC is a serious contender in the Democratic presidential primary. You look at Europe. Young people, if they're not voting for the populist right, which they are in large numbers, then they're voting for the populist left, and they're going to be far worse to tech companies than any right-wing party. As someone who cares exclusively, it's my job to care exclusively about free speech. That's what my nonprofit cares about. What I want to see the tech right do is get much more serious about fighting these foreign online censorship laws, which they all say they're opposed to. But we've seen nothing like the level of commitment that Zuckerberg used to give to the Biden campaign and to progressive causes against those laws in places like Brazil, the UK, and the European Union. The Digital Services Act in particular, I would say, is the #1 threat to online free speech in the world today. And it would be great if trade negotiations that the Trump administration is doing could, perhaps turn the DSA into a bit of a bargaining chip. It could be weakened in exchange for trade concessions. But you also want to.
Unfortunately, Allum, that's not what happened during USMCA. During USMCA, a lot of the special protections that big tech had in U.S. law, they were able to get baked into that treaty, where now even more enlightened lawmakers wouldn't be able to undo it. So do you even think those type of trade deals and how they approach tech are going directionally correct? And then we're going to move on. But I'll give you the last word on it.
I remember that. I think it's much better this time around. I think that, you go out to the previous administration, there were so many people, as we know, in that administration who were not really on board with the free speech agenda. In fact, people inside the administration and in the deep state at the time tried to undermine online free speech. I think this administration is a complete sea change from that one. The personnel issue has been completely solved. And I expect that free speech probably will be a part of those trade negotiations. But the other thing the tech right needs to do, the tech industry needs to do, is build long-term movements in favor of free speech in these other countries, as they have done with progressive causes in the past.
Look, we've all seen how unpredictable things can get. Whether it's supply chain issues, unexpected emergencies, or just trying to get a doctor to prescribe what you already know you need. It's become way harder than it should be. That's why I trust All Family Pharmacy. They're not just another online pharmacy. They're changing the game to put you first. They're giving you the freedom to order what you need when you need it, so you're never left without essential medications. They've got everything: ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, antibiotics, daily maintenance medications, emergency kits, and a whole lot more. I even get my magnesium supplements there. Over 200 medications are ready to ship, and yes, you can order in bulk to be prepared. The process is simple. You fill out a quick online form. One of their licensed doctors provides the prescription, and your meds are shipped right to you. No insurance required, no hassle, no waiting around or being unreasonably limited in your options. That's what real medical freedom looks like. You're in control, just like it should be. Stock up today. Make sure you've got the meds you need on hand. Go to allfamilypharmacy.com/Matt. Use code MATT10 for 10% off your order. Trust me, these guys are doing it right. So, the big question I wanted to address was the utility of the 22nd Amendment. We have seen a lot of Republican lawmakers and commentators say Trump should be able to run again, and that is the basis of their approach to whether or not a president should be able to be elected more than twice. I want to zoom out beyond just, whether or not it is a reflection of whether or not you believe Trump ought to be able to get another opportunity. Have we as a country outlived the utility of the two-term limit on our presidents? You look at our pacing challenge in China, you look at our global competitors, and there is a durability of leadership. You see at the areas in the world where capital is rising and decisions are being made in the Middle East, a region that was run by a bunch of octogenarians now is run by a bunch of guys in their 30s and 40s. And for America to have that kind of durability, we may need more than 8 years out of someone. People are living longer than now. It is a larger federal bureaucracy that one has to manage, that it takes a little longer to kind of gather control on it, to get your people in place. It takes longer than ever to confirm your key appointees, and thus 8 years is truncated. And isn't it kind of a limitation on democracy? All I've heard from the left lately is that they want to vindicate democracy, and the two-term limit limits the choice of voters. So I think it's something worthy of debate. And if I were a lawmaker today, I would seriously consider voting to repeal the 22nd Amendment. What do you think, Kara?
Ooh, so that's definitely a spicy question, right? Especially with the left, and they're always talking about, Trump, he's a dictator and authoritarian. So, but like you're saying, then that means the power of whether or not he continues past 8 years would be in the hands of the people. So is that really a dictator? That would be hard to make that case, right? Yes and no. I do go.
Way to go out on a limb. All right, Vish, come on. I know you want to give me a hot take. Kara's going to think about it for a second.
The 22nd Amendment needs to be repealed. I don't think it was ever useful in the beginning. I don't think it was fair that FDR got to sit in the White House for 4 terms and then turns around and says, nobody else gets this opportunity. Okay, so I'm totally against it. The founders never had it. In the beginning, they didn't put term limits in the Senate. They didn't put term limits in the House, and they didn't put term limits on the White House. And I think that obviously they wanted a country where the people were able to decide how long exactly they wanted certain parties, certain people sitting in those seats for however long that they wanted. And especially today, when you consider that our number one opponent geopolitically is China, that's able to move in 100-year clips. If we can't get past 8, that is a massive problem. If we can't execute an agenda past 8 years with the leadership that we have, it's going to be a massive issue in trying to not just fight back against China, but just to keep up. And so, yeah, the 22nd Amendment needs to go. Trump 2028, 32, however long he wants to sit there, he can sit there.
Well, the 8 years then it necessitates having a deep state, right? Because like you're saying, when you're going up against all these presidents and all these military juntas, all these, groups that can govern for essentially however long that they would like to in these other countries. And like you're saying, China and how they can, have Xi Jinping sit in office for many, many, many years. Then again, I think then the State Department and the rest would say, well, that's why you need the deep state. You need us, right? Or it doesn't really matter who's elected, because who cares what the people say? We'll just keep governing the way we want to keep governing.
Well, in every system that has term limits, in every legislative system, it does empower the bureaucracy. And the question is that preferable to empowering kind of long-term office holders? And in the legislative system, I actually think the churn is better. I support term limits for lawmakers because I actually don't think there's anything that special about lawmaking. You're representing people in a community regarding their interests. And I think that being the executive is different. So, Allum, will you rescue us from our radicalism on this issue, or are you going to join in the repeal the 22nd Amendment parade?
I think Kara actually hit the nail on the head there with this point about the deep state. And as he was saying, Matt, it does kind of empower the bureaucrats. And it's interesting, if you look at the history, it's interesting that it's all started with FDR, who, as Vish was saying, was able to serve 4 terms, was the last president who was able to do that. FDR really created the modern bureaucracy as we know it. It was started by Woodrow Wilson, but it was finalized by FDR. He's the one that installed the giant bureaucracy that became what we now know as the deep state. And I'm actually less radical than other conservatives when it comes to the administrative state of FDR and of Woodrow Wilson. It wasn't really that bad until the 1960s. It did some impressive things. It built the interstate highway system. It built the Minuteman missiles. It was very, very impressive until it merged with the civil rights bureaucracy in the 1960s, and then it all went haywire. But clearly, there's been very little. It's been very, very difficult to reform it ever since FDR, and possibly term limits have something to do with that.
Would you be afraid about Obama coming back and being a viable candidate?
So,
No. Kara, what do you think?
So that would be one issue that I'd be worried about, right? Because we have basically what started out with the founders' intention of being a small republic morphed into mass democracy. And that, I think, ends up being the rub, because you look at someone like Pelosi, she'll just be voted until she dies or resigns or whatever.
She's at least effective. Whatever people want to say about Nancy Pelosi, it's an incredibly effective operator. If you want to live in a meritocracy, probably in San Francisco, you're not going to throw a rock on the streets of San Francisco and hit something more competent at the acclamation and deployment of power than Nancy Pelosi.
Well, so what I have a problem. So I'm not someone who's pro-democracy, right? As you can see, my views may be considered by some as a radical conservative, but I'm kind of, like I said, post-liberal. That's my mindset. However, so to me, democracy is 3 wolves and a sheep voting for what's for dinner, and they go, well, hey, we voted, so it makes it all fine. So I would instead say, if you want to do the 22nd Amendment, I would say to add some meat to it. I would say that we should kind of go back to the founders' intentions, or at least closer in alignment. Basically, you need to have real stake in America. We're talking about 18-year-olds and then down to 16-year-olds and shit felons. I think, wasn't it Bernie Sanders saying the surviving Tsarnaev brothers Boston bomber should still be able to vote? Things like that. I say let's even dispense with that and say, are you a homeowner? Do you own property? Are you married? I think there's other issues that say I have a stake.
How long do you go on that list before you get to the poll tax? I mean, are you for the poll tax? Let's see what the limiting principle on Kara's diminution of democracy.
No, definitely not that, obviously. Okay. However,
literacy test?
How about, are you a taxpayer? I think that's a good.
Well, she's already for that. She already said she's for that. Would you do a literacy test?
Maybe the 8th grade USA government little test, and it's the same thing that if you immigrate to this country, you need to be able to pass.
You do a social studies test.
See, I'm not putting down any hard and fast rules. I'm saying that in a general direction, I think that's maybe where we should go.
Yeah, but don't you worry about the left weaponizing that? Where if somebody doesn't answer the questions,
the left tried to put Trump in prison and got him shot last year. I think we're beyond what if the left's back in power? Who knows what they'll do next? It's like they've done some crazy stuff at this point. We won. Fair. We need to keep governing. It's time to build and to create the future we want, instead of saying, well, what if the left wins again? It's like, well, again, like I said, they almost threw Trump in prison. And if you look at right-wing governments around the world, their leaders are always constantly being thrown in prison and made unable to run because...
We've thrown some of them in prison.
Well,
Fact fascinating. Vish, take us home.
I know
I'm
what
sorry, go ahead.
I know
Alan.
what the left would say if they were thinking along these lines. They'd say everyone, you can only vote if you have a master's degree. You can only vote if you're an expert.
If you have your pronouns in your email, if you're willing to accept as a fundamental premise of our social studies that the white man, should never have gone to battle with Native Americans and should have surrendered upon arriving, obviously, to their own slaughter. Vish, take us home. What do you want to talk about?
All right. So recently there's been a massive dust up and uproar over the guests that are appearing on Joe Rogan's podcast. And namely, the people who have taken issue with this are Barry Weiss of the Free Press and most recently Douglas Murray, who appeared on Joe Rogan's podcast and essentially went on Joe Rogan's platform in his face and said, you need to have standards on who you're booking as guests on the show. It's not about, and he basically says it's not the problem of the ideas that you're talking about or the questions that you're talking about, but who you're allowing on your massive platform to talk about these things. And they've been pointing out guests such as Andrew Isker and Daryl Cooper and Ian Carroll. And basically, and then Jordan Peterson goes on Joe Rogan's podcast and takes it a step further and says, oh, James Lindsay kind of calls these people woke, right? But that's wrong. Actually, they're just psychopaths, right? And so you shouldn't have these psychopaths on your show, on your platform. And what really needs to happen is podcasts need to have standards and guardrails. And I'm thinking, like, where have these people been the last 10 to 15 years? The whole point of the podcast, of this decentralized, disintermediated media, is the point to not have any guardrails. You can talk about what you want, how long you want to talk about it. You could take the conversation anywhere. You could take the conversation off on a tangent if you want. That's the whole point, to allow conversations to naturally evolve. And Joe Rogan has built that model to great success. And now you have all of these people who America only knows about them because they appeared on Joe Rogan's podcast, telling Joe Rogan how to book his show with his guests. And I think it is an outrage. These people will turn around, look you in the face, and say that there is no bigger free speech advocate out there than me, and then turn around to Joe Rogan and say, you shouldn't have certain people on your podcast. I think it's outrageous, and I think that there's a real conversation to be had about our podcasts and this disintermediated media ecosystem gonna start having, only experts. You can only talk about certain subjects with certain people. This person is approved to talk about this subject. I think that's a dangerous game to play. They're gonna take us back to exactly what we broke away from. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on this. Like, you've had podcasts, you have shows. Would you ever consider, like, one of your guests telling you who you're allowed to have on your show?
Vish, I think this is very substantial projection on your part to let Kara and Allum and the rest of our viewers in on this. Vish had a bit of a difficult week at work this week. He's the booker on the Matt Gaetz show, and he booked someone who was dressed like a dominatrix. And so now, suspiciously, he has raised this issue of how low the bottom should be on booking.
No, it's not about how low the bottom should be. And I'm not comparing the guests you're talking about to these other people who are clearly have massive followings, have great perspective and insights.
I get what you're asking. Quickly, and I'm dying to hear Allum's take on it because he's an expert in the area. I think when we start to do that, like you say, you lose the rawness and the edge and the unique feature of this space. And people listen to podcasts in a different way than they consume television. And the way you credential in this medium is by having something interesting to say, having a warrant for your claims. game, having thought about something. Whereas on television, it is the recitation of sound bites and talking points and achievement of a viral moment. And we're not immune to that. We try to create interesting moments for our viewers every single night on the Matt Gaetz Show. But I think it is different than trying to go a layer beneath that. And I think over cooking the sauce with a critique of credentialism is misplaced.
Okay. Well, Kara, how about you? Like, what do you think? What do you think about this?
So once again, let me think so I don't get in too much trouble with my thoughts on this. When I watched that debate, as you're referencing, Douglas Murray versus Dave Smith on Joe Rogan, the pot shots that Douglas Murray was taking at Dave, but then also Daryl Cooper of the Murder Maid podcast. What he kept basically getting back to was he had never listened to Daryl Cooper. He has no clue who Daryl Cooper is, what his beliefs are, what his thoughts are on anything, and how well researched he is either. What he does instead is he conflates them with smear merchants, and he just puts them all in the same group, and he just says, yeah, they're all bad people. Don't listen to any of them. Well, that ends up meaning it's censorship because Douglas Murray kept really harping on credentialism and expertise. But then he talks about the war and the Israel-Hamas war all the time. He talks about the Ukraine war. He talks about these wars that, as far as I'm aware, he's not an historian. I don't believe he's done scholarly work. He's written books. He's a journalist. But he is not also the card-carrying credentialed expert that he claims can only speak about it. So, in fact, what he's saying is, you just can't talk about it. But then when Dave Smith would push back and Joe Rogan push back saying, well, what about when you're talking about free speech? He's like, well, of course you can talk about it. Well, I thought you said I can't talk. Well, you can't because you're just a comedian. And it was this weird back and forth. And basically he's saying is I have my certain pet issues and I will come down really hard when you go against my pet issue. And I will use, it's like how the left does. It's they have their end goal in mind and they use arguments like this. They switch it around. And that's why too many people on the right, when we're trying to debate someone on the left, we're trying to attack their argument. And it's like, well, it's not even their argument. They don't care about the argument. They don't care about the logic or the reasoning. What they care about is what they want at the end of that. And that's what you have to keep attacking. So that was my main problem with Douglas Murray, as he admitted he has no clue anything about Daryl Cooper, doesn't even know his stance on anything, just assumes he knows what he's talking about, and then says, shut up, don't talk about it. But of course you can talk about it, but also don't talk about it. It was the threat, the veiled implicit threat of, don't you dare, I will destroy you, Joe Rogan, however I can. And that's what I have a problem with.
Yeah, I mean, to say the least, it sounds like, Douglas Murray and James Lindsay types, they're using woke tactics to censor the very people that they turn around and say, hey, we're free speech advocates for. Allum, how about you? What is your take on this? I know you've been a veteran of the space.
Yes, first of all, sorry about the lighting here. I had excellent natural light in this room when I started. But the sun's just gone down.
I know you look so much more distinguished and credentialed now. Now that you're the silhouette of Allum Bokhari has joined us.
So yeah, to Vish's point, I think so. I write a lot about online censorship, but that's only one side of the censorship coin over the last few decades. The other side, I think, is this culture of denunciations and deplatforming, where you're not allowed to have so and so on your show. You're not allowed to platform this person. I want you to condemn this person before we could even talk about their ideas. That sort of culture, right? And I think the reason why Douglas Murray's comments and Jordan Peterson's comments brought about such a backlash is because it seems to be pointing back in that direction. We've just gotten past this era in history where you had people being asked to ritually denounce people essentially for their political views, and now we're trying to get back to this idea where you have to have a certain credential, you have to have the right opinions to be able to go on these podcasts. And as Kara said, I mean the whole expert thing. Yes, there is a genuine sense that there's a sort of crisis of competency right now. There's a sense where anyone can talk about any topic without any sort of background in the area. Sure, but at the same time, if you insist on expert credentials for everything, then Douglas Murray couldn't talk about 70 to 80% of the things he talks about, because if you only talk about the one thing you're credentialed in, that's not going to be very much.
Matt?
I am glad I am at least credentialed in one thing. And like I said, I think that the value of somebody's contribution to the conversation has to matter somewhere. And if the podcasting space, if the online space, if the streaming space aren't accommodating that, then I don't know what will. And I'm grateful it does. I'm grateful that Allum fights for it every day as the managing director for the Foundation for Freedom Online. I'm so excited that we get to be here on this amazing pirate ship we call One America News, with Kara McKinney, who hosts, and with Vish, who produces, and I do the Matt Gaetz Show on weeknights, 9 o'clock Eastern, 6 Pacific. Please make sure you get our live app at oann.com and give us 5 stars, leave us a review, let us know who you'd like us to talk to and get great ideas from in the future. Thanks for joining us on Anchormen.
Want to see more great videos like this? Click on the link below to subscribe to OAN Live and watch Dan Ball's Real America and The Matt Gaetz Show on Dish Channel 212. Tune in, subscribe, and watch today.
I'm so excited when we get our Merriweather Farms shipments in. You get a beautiful piece of ribeye. Look at that marbling. Now, I take it out of the package, let it get down to room temperature. All I've got on here is a little salt, a little pepper, and then a little avocado oil. And then I've had my pan preheating with a little oil.
Head to Merriweather Farms.